Good morning. Welcome to Cherry Becker's 2023 update to DCAA Hot Buttons webinar. I appreciate everyone joining us today and getting ready to walk through the different updates when it comes to DCAA, the priorities, strategies for audits, and report to the IG and some other areas that we'll be providing some insight on for court cases and such. Just to let everyone know, we will try to get to questions as we go through the presentation. However, if we don't, we will follow up at the end of the presentation, and we'll make sure to get back to everyone. If you have questions, please use the live chat to drop your questions in, and we will make sure to either try to address them during the presentation, but knowing we're on a time constraint, at least get back to you at the end. So our speakers today for Cherry Becker. My name is Eric Poppy. I'm a managing director in our government contracting industry practice. And with me today is John, Brendan, and Jacqueline. And I'm going to turn it over to them to give a quick background on themselves. They're really the stars of the show when it comes to the DCAA update 2023 edition. So John, I'll turn it over to you, and then we'll go Brendan and Jacqueline. Do you guys mind giving a quick just background or bio on yourself?
All right, thanks, Eric. Yeah, a quick bio. I am an attorney by training and a retired government employee. I was a procurement attorney with DOD for 20 some odd years. I came to Cherry Becker a few years after my retirement from the government in 23. And so I've been there almost 20 years now. And as I said, I'm an attorney by training. So I am not an accountant or an auditor, and I don't pretend to be. So I'll let Brendan take it from there.
Great, thanks, Johnny. I'm Brendan Halloran. I've been with Cherry Becker for about 2 years now, and actually prior to joining the firm, I was with Defense Contract Management Agency, or DCAA, as many of you are probably familiar with. The bulk of my time there was spent as a divisional ACO, so spent a lot of time working very closely with DCAA, and was the kind of on the receiving end of lots of different types of audit reports, and we'll talk about some of those types today. So glad to be here.
I was part of the audit side, so I'll go through that. I did about 8 years with DCAA as a senior auditor, and then 2 years with DCMA as a cost price analyst. So that'll cover about 10 years.
Thank you all. And as you guys can see today, we kind of have the yin and the yang of former government folks, of contracting side, auditing side, and also general counsel background that we'll be walking through. That'll help me walk through our presentation today, giving you updates with DCAA. So a little bit of background on myself. Again, Eric Poppy. I have always been on the consulting side at Cherry Becker. Started my career here at Cherry Becker, went to KPMG and boomeranged back, helping to lead our government contracting practice. So today's agenda, we're going to walk through pretty much everything that's happened with DCAA over the last year when it comes to regulatory updates, and talk through some initiatives and audit priorities that we're seeing that has been published, and also that we're seeing in the marketplace. We're going to walk through DCAA's report to Congress, also the DoD's IG findings. We're going to walk through new MRDs that have come out over the last year. Talk about the new compensation cap, and also talk about some important court cases that have been settled in that might help give some insight for contractors. So we know that this is always a moving target, and that there's always new guidance that comes out and new reports that come issued from the government. So right now, we're in February. Probably be new reports that get published in the spring and summer. So we'll of course do updates as those come out periodically with any new changes. So with that, I will turn it over to Brendan to talk a little bit about the DCAA initiatives.
Great, thanks, Eric. Yeah, so here we have just some summary data that DCAA captures in terms of what they're doing with their workforce, some of their initiatives, and how things are tracking and how they're forecasting some of their goals, where they want to be. Obviously, we're into at least calendar year 2023, so we expect that we'll see some additional kind of feedback in terms of DCAA reporting later in the springtime. But just in kind of overview terms, firms. Workforce environment, obviously that's a little bit to, kind of understand the engagement of their personnel, and certainly the objective being that they can, retain a lot of those audit folks. They spent quite a bit of effort, really, staffing up over the past few years. And, certainly the focus there is to retain those folks and get them, further trained and additional experience on some of the engagements. In terms of, some of the quality and GAGAS standards, and again, they're, certainly tracking in a direction of, meeting GAGAS standards and, are pretty optimistic in terms of, continual growth there. Last, kind of recorded data point that we had was, 86% back in 2020. And, I think one of the challenges there is as our, audit workload and programs increase, certainly timing is always a factor there to meet those standards. So that's certainly something that we're tracking and interested when we talk with clients to see how quickly are things going, and are they actually getting full audit reports. In terms of productivity, forward pricing, and we'll talk about a couple of these topics throughout, forward pricing, business systems in particular. But, forward pricing, I think this is an interesting statistic in terms of at least in 2020, showing that they've got, a 93% delivery according to the original due date. And for, folks who have been through DCAA audits, that in the past, in some cases, that would be a moving target. It would be established that it would take, X, period of time, and then, get negotiated further out depending on the time needed. So certainly for negotiation purposes on proposals where the government's relying on forward pricing rates, that's helpful to contractors to if they can meet or exceed some of these delivery timeframes. I'm always interested to know, and this is where we don't have all the granularity, are they reporting on the full forward pricing rate proposal? They may be reporting on certain aspects of it. It could be indirect only or direct labor, or other factors there. In terms of pre-award accounting systems, we're certainly seeing quite a few of those with clients, and so that continues to I think kind of track to what their internal goals are. And then the two that you really see just marked differences and increased activity is around the truth and negotiation audits and business system audits. And so on the truth and negotiations, that they had DCAA had been doing those for a number of years, but there's quite a backlog. So DCAA would issue the reports, and there was not necessarily a contracting officer on the receiving end that was able to or capable of resolving. And so certainly DCMA has put some focused attention and stood up a team to help support and resolve those. So it'll be interesting to see in the coming year how much progress has been made with those. And then business systems, I think that's important for everyone, is that that's pretty much a topic every day talking with clients. There's a lot of activity, particularly starting with accounting, estimating, and we're seeing DCAA also move into MMAS in some cases where it's applicable. So certainly they have really stepped up the activity around that, and I would imagine that many of the folks attending today are seeing that on their end too. So in terms of kind of their overarching strategic plan, DCAA's got some fairly broad goals in terms of really working more closely with and partnering with their customers, mainly their DoD buying activities, being a little bit more flexible in terms of tailoring the scope of audits where needed so that they can actually deliver on time something that's going to be actionable by their customers. And then as we talked just on the previous slide, really getting not only recruiting, but, cultivating, and then more importantly, retaining some of the audit staff. So, one thing that, we do observe, and I'm sure you see kind of movement as well, is that, now that third-party firms are also doing incurred cost audits. I think DCA's got a little bit more competition for some of that same staff, and so I think that that's certainly a challenge that they'll continue to run into. Excuse me. And then on the kind of the two initiatives that really reporting in terms of completed or making progress on in terms of customer focus is really defining what are the needs of some of those buying activities and agencies in terms of you can see the forward pricing, the TINA audits. Those are certainly in response to what feedback they're getting from customers. And there's definitely been some progress in terms of kind of networking, whether it be, kind of aligning with, contractor organizations across DCAA offices. That certainly has been a big focus area. And then also, really standardizing, some of the processes, because they are trying to be more flexible and, really help to engage on an ongoing basis outside of the standard audit program. So, one thing, there's, kind of a recent, DFARS change in terms of, the requirement to, really consider, fixed price, type contracts. And so now that has been, kind of eased up on a little bit, it does, kind of make us wonder if, going forward, if there's going to be, more of a shift back to some cost reimbursable type contracts on some programs. That takes some of the risk away that DCA uses for proposal audits. So, it'll be interesting to see, kind of what activity is happening there, in the coming, 1 to 2 years.
All right, so let's start addressing what DCAA is going to be looking at for audit priorities. Demand audits are going to be anything that the ACO wants to be audited. So they'll send their request to DCAA, and they tend to be your pre and post award audits, your floor checks, and things like that. We've got our incurred cost proposal audits, which are being divvied up between DCAA and the independent public accounting firms. Business system audits, the truth and negotiation audits, your high risk real-time audits, like your mandatory annual audit requirements. These are going to be your floor checks, and like your material management audits. We've got the CAS compliance are going to see an upswing, operations audits, some other direct activity, and local priority. So whatever the local office is wanting to audit that year is going to be pushed. All right, so let's kind of focus in on the business systems, cost accounting standards, and truth in negotiations. So DCAA conducted 592 of these audits, creating a significant focus on the business systems, with accounting, estimating, and material management as their main focus. We're also seeing DCAA shifting from a 3-year business system audit cycle to a 4-year review. So the goal is to have more of the small businesses being introduced into regular business system reviews. Okay, so an area that's going to be impacted, we've got the 2017 NDAA section 893. This is going to allow IPAs to be the certifying officials for business systems through audit. So this is going to be interesting to watch as it's played out. We're still waiting on confirmation on the DFARS rule, since it was last updated in June of 2022.
So to piggyback off that, from Jacqueline and talking through DCAA's audit priorities, we're also seeing a upswing in the forward pricing rate proposal audits. And really the focus there is timeliness and trying to get them done quicker. For a long time, we really didn't see or hear anything about that. And now you can see more of a push, and more clients and companies are seeing that happen, which is good. And again, really the focus is more timely audits that can help increase that suspension rate, which we'll get into too. The other thing that we're seeing, and there's been a big push, is CAS audits. DCAA is now more regularly initiating those CAS audits. And also digging into the disclosure statements and making sure those are timely reviewed for initial disclosure, or also any changes. So that has been reduced, which is good, versus having many iterations of maybe that disclosure statement outstanding. But we are seeing a big uptake there with CAS audits. So making sure that you understand CAS coverage, you understand which contracts it applies to, versus if you have some that are not CAS covered contracts. Remember, CAS applies to the contract itself, and making sure you have that timely disclosure too, because there's a timeline to that. We are also seeing more, as Jacqueline mentioned, audits focused on TINA and in compliance with 10 USC Chapter 271. Again, really focusing in on the contract price adjustment recommendations that are made. And then, as Jacqueline mentioned, there's always that local piece to it too. You have each DCAA office has their own priority and preferences based off the people that are working there, which agencies they're really supplementing, if it's Army, Navy, and so on, and what are the priorities of that office. So we are seeing depending on the office, maybe more of a focus on business systems in one, incurred costs on the other, forward pricing, CAS. It really depends on who are the contractors in the area, what is the priority of the office, and what is going on. So, I'm going to ask our panel here of folks, what are you all currently seeing in the market? Have you noticed anything when it comes to some of DCAA's audit priorities, just with companies that you're talking to and with clients that we're helping out?
Yeah, I'll jump in. One of the areas, as I mentioned early on, that we'd be, touching on throughout is contractor business systems. We certainly are starting to see the result of some of those audits, and working with a number of clients, not only, accounting's probably, the one that's, probably the highest volume, but certainly seeing some of the others in terms of estimating in particular, where, the system, perhaps has not been, looked at by the government in many years, if ever. And so, a lot of these audit reports do have, non-compliances or findings. And so, it's really a matter of, kind of working through things that, if you've got DFAR's business system clauses, it certainly can escalate into an issue in terms of resolving those corrective actions that might be needed and demonstrated to, the ACO, leading all the way through, potential, payment withholds and system disapproval. So that's, one area that, we really are seeing folks, who thought that they were operating, in compliance, with all of the, the system criteria. And, lo and behold, now that they've got an audit report, it's, kind of a, I'll say rude awakening in terms of, the number of issues that, that are coming through in those audit reports to resolve.
And one thing to add to that is that there's a timeline to that, and it can be it is a pretty aggressive timeline too, to get those corrective actions in place and show it and justify and write up the action plan and submit it. So it's not you don't have a long runway really if you are found deficient and have many significant deficiencies.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a pretty defined timeline. And so, it does really make contractors really have to act very quickly to, try and get ahead of that, or, or kind of resolve some things that they've had sitting out there.
Good point.
So on DCA report to Congress, obviously, certainly a lot of focus, not only with DCA, but I think with, all, agencies, justifying budgets and really kind of, shifting to, looking at metrics and in terms of, return on investment. That's a big area, not only DCA in terms of audit, but also, what is, for instance, what is DCMA doing with some of those audit reports. So obviously, significant, contract costs that were, have been audited, in terms of question costs or audit exceptions. And then, they're really tracking, in this case, 3.7 billion in savings. And so, tying that to, what really is, savings is that, money that was, either, removed or negotiated, on a particular, contract, or recovered otherwise. There's certainly, a lot of ways to get there, and so right now they're certainly tracking, what they would see is, fairly good ROI, 5 to 1 in some cases. And so, there is a little bit of detail here about, how they're, developing these metrics. And, we'll talk a little bit further about, what are the true sustained or recovered costs, because there can be a little bit of, fuzziness in terms of, what that is. But again, the one to point out here too is that, I think the highest ROI that they're citing is, the forward pricing audits. And I know a lot of folks and, clients that, may be on today, may not have a requirement for, forward pricing rate proposal and, for forward pricing rates being established. But just to, kind of put a little, kind of a little gauge around this is that, for, let's say, DCMA's purposes, they would be looking at, a contractor over 200 million is potentially having, having a need for forward pricing rates and, formal cost monitoring program. So, that, is not a small number, but, with that, there are, ways that contractors below some of those thresholds could also be subject to it. And so, definitely like to point that out, because there may be a significant potential contract award coming up where a customer agency can, request a contractor to supply for pricing rate proposal. And so, some of those requirements, although, you may think that you're, kind of, under the radar screen on that, it is possible that, if there's, a significant risk determined, by the government in terms of, proposal activity, it is something that you may need to look at. And DCA would certainly be, part of that, that process. And then in terms of, there's certainly some groups that are, focused on supporting some of the investigations. So you can see that there's, some cited recoveries, upwards of 250 million. And so, that's where their, DCA audit teams are focused on, supporting some of those investigations. And, and those could be a result of, an audit finding or, another type of report. So, certainly, very busy season for DCA.
See, on this first bullet here, DCA is talking about their sustention rate for fiscal year 2021. This is, as Brendan indicated, there may be some question about this sustention rate, because the rate is based on actions taken by the contracting officer in regard to a DCA audit report. It's a formal audit report. Now, DCA is not tracking what may happen if the contracting officer, for example, issues a final decision in regard to a DCA audit report for an incurred cost proposal where DCA questioned certain cost, but resulted in an overpayment to the contractor, and the contracting officer demanded a repayment and issued a final decision taking back money from the contractor. DCA tracked. What happens if the contractor appeals that action and the contractor's appeal is sustained? So that would reduce the suspension rate for DCAA. Just excuse me, a couple of points. You see DCA's asserting here in this report to Congress that the average time to complete an incurred cost audit was 203 days, which is down a little bit, 53 days from what was in 2018. So that's a little bit of progress being made in regard to the congressional directive that DCA complete these audits within 1 year after receipt of an adequate submission. And also in regard to these private accounting firms who are doing audits for DCAA, the DCA had 122 of these audits performed in 2021, fiscal year 21. But the DCA report and DCA statistics don't report any statistics on these audits, for example, as to what costs were questioned, what costs were sustained, et cetera, et cetera. Also, DCA didn't state whether the results of these audits were included in the DCA statistics. And finally, we get down to the point where for OTAs, other transactions, these are agreements, excuse me, my voice is going, that are not subject to the FAR. So basically, they are not contracts as contemplated by the FAR, but DCAA is getting more and more involved in these and is helping contracting officers or agreements officers to formulate clauses that go into these OTAs.
So we're going to kind of roll through the breakdown of audit type and dollars examined and audited exceptions. So total overall, DCA audited 2,712 audits between forward pricing, incurred costs, claims and terminations, and your systems, CAS and TIN. They reviewed 259.7 billion, and then they questioned 5.3 billion. All right, so net savings and the return on investment by audit type. So we kind of ran through this earlier with Brendan. So this is kind of your net savings, your aggregate cost of performing audits based on the percentage of direct audit hours. And then they determined how much we were getting on our return on investment here. So Brendan kind of ran through this quickly. So I think we can roll on to the next one. Okay, so suspension by amount and percentage of the audit exception. So this is offering a audit type breakdown. So we have the forward pricing, they questioned 5.4 billion. The exceptions that were sustained was running around 3.3 billion to get the percent sustained of 61.3. Incurred cost, we were sitting at about 30.8% sustained. Claims and terminations, we were at 46.6. The systems, CAS and TIN, the DCA was around 55.3. So they combined their question cost, how much was sustained, and kind of calculated a percent sustained for all the audit types at 52.9%.
So just to slow down here for a second, this slide, I think, says a lot of what's going on right now in the current environment. A couple things that jump out to me is from a system standpoint, and with DCAs and the government's more focus on the business systems, that suspension rate of being 55.3, historically companies got very used to the incurred cost audits and systems weren't being audited at all for a long time, or other than the majors. So that being lower doesn't surprise me. And with systems now upticking to 55.3, it just shows kind of one, getting back used to those regulations and the criteria for the systems to the audits that are in the focus of that's happening. But I know Brendan, you talked about it a little bit, and you mentioned how it can be a little fuzzy, I think was the technical term that we used earlier. But what goes into these sustention rates? Can you just elaborate a little bit more? And is it hard to justify? What's kind of the dynamic between DCAA and the CO?
Yeah, no, and using, I think, forward pricing to start with, just because that, we've mentioned it a few times already as being, pretty high focus area, and DCAA, putting quite a bit of effort and resources towards them. Just for perspective on that, you certainly, you would have, potentially an ACO issue. And so, one area that, I think is interesting there, just to kind of highlight, how that works, is that, you may have, a contracting officer, issuing, either a recommendation based on that. And in some cases, forward pricing rate agreement or FPRA, which are certainly a lot fewer and far between, where, the contractor actually is, committing to utilizing those rates in all of their negotiated actions. And so I think one of the areas there that, looking at these numbers that we don't necessarily get, clear insight into, is that, it really, requires the various, PCOs and buying activities that are negotiating contract awards to, provide feedback in terms of what did that negotiation actually result in? Because just from my experience, certainly there may be some movement from, either a DCAA audit position or even a DCMA recommendation as to what the final, indirect rates utilized and, the cost or pricing for that. So, getting, price negotiation memorandums from, buying activities, I think can be a challenge, within the government. And so, I think that's, just one area to kind of highlight the multiple pieces or, parties that are involved in actually, where those dollars or, exceptions or question dollars sustained come out to be. So I think that's, one good example of, these look, fairly significant and fairly high rates. And I think that there is, always a little bit of, as I said earlier, fuzziness in terms of, is that actually what went, with the contract?
There is quite a bit of, could be an overlap in a lot of these audit types that DCAA is discussing here. And exactly what DCAA means by these categories of audits is not clear. For example, we see here claims and terminations. When the government issues a decision on a CAS audit or truth in negotiations, those type of decisions by the government are government claims. So is DCAA, how are they relating to those actions? Are they considering those not to be a claim, where it might be appealable, where there's a contracting officer's final decision asserting a claim against a contractor? Where do these audits and these dollar figures get rolled into this entire process? If there's been an overpayment to a contractor, say for a result of indirect rates that were applied on a contract, and the government makes a demand for a repayment, or says a cost is unallowable, that again is a government claim against the contractor. So in my mind, I'm not quite sure what these audits are entailing, or exactly what type of effort is related or involved by DCAA. And just let me go back to one other thing about the return on investment, which is a political statement by DCAA, that return on investment is one thing that they try to use to justify their existence and their staffing levels. But you notice the return on investment is talking only about direct audit hours. DCAA has an overhead that when they do interagency work or work for other agencies, they bill the other agency at a loaded hourly rate, which DCAA applies an overhead rate for DCA to that hourly rate they charge to other agencies. But they're not using that overhead rate or the loaded rate when they're computing the ROI. So there's a little bit of deception going on there, in my opinion. So I'll just leave it at that.
And I think that in the end, for a lot of these, and when it comes to any audit findings, the DCA might have going back and working with the auditors as much as possible to get that dollar amount lower, and then working with your contracting officer and having a good relationship there. And comes down to, you know, processing people a lot of times, just like everything else. So so with that, Jacqueline, do you want to close us out on
Yep,
numbers?
let's close this out. So for incurred cost audit reports, we had DCA issue 594, and the low risk memos was 2,745. So that was a lot of dollars examined, 202 billion to close that out.
So, you know, as we mentioned before, back in 2018, there were DCAA actually contracted out, the government actually contracted out incurred cost audits by independent public accounting firms. And as we mentioned in a previous slide, and we'll get into in a little bit, you know, this might happen with business systems as well. Now, from a, there were over 122 incurred cost audits done by IPAs. So with that, I want to turn it over to the group again. Of what are we currently seeing when it comes to these independent accounting firms performing ICS audits versus DCAA? You know, one thing I'll start with is, from a timing standpoint, it used to be DCAA took a really long time to complete these audits. Now that timeline seemed to have shrunk, and the independent accounting firms, it used to be pretty short, but now it seems like the timeline is about the same, or, you know, within a reasonable amount of DCAA. You can't really distinguish between the two depending on the firm. So, you know, for example, we have, I've seen companies that have, I know of a company that the audit started this summer and it's still ongoing now with a third-party firm. So that's just one example that I have. Do you all have any other piece of information that you've seen in the marketplace?
Well, I mean, just one thing we've seen from some of our, clients is that, is that some of the, independent, firm audits, in some cases, appear to be, more intensive and digging even deeper than, what they'd experienced previously with DCAA. And, kind of on the flip side of that, we've also seen seen cases where they seem to meet the steps of the audit program, but not necessarily dig into some potential high risk cost areas. So at this point, I'd say it's a little bit of a mixed bag of some folks feel like it's potentially even more robust and more resource intensive, and others that it's been a fairly smooth process.
Yeah, I will add a little bit to that. I second what Brendan has said. Now, you notice that DCA only had 100 private auditors only do 122 incurred cost audits. So that's a small sample. And of course, we don't have any relationship to most of those companies that were subject to those audits. But we have had experience with engaging with private auditors who've done audits for other agencies. So if we can extrapolate from that, what we will see is that the private auditors seem to load up the audits with a good number of auditors. For example, DCAA may send 1 or 2 people to do an audit, but these private auditors may send 6 or more. So they can be crawling all over the contractor's facility. Also, the auditors, the private auditors, don't seem to have as much of an understanding of what's required for an audit as do the DCAA auditors. So, when you're doing a comparison between the private auditors and DCAA auditors seem to be more knowledgeable of the subject matter than do the private auditors. In the limited experience that I've had with these private auditors.
I definitely think that it's been a mixed bag regarding timing and approach in audit and audit plan. So thank you all.
Just to touch on, a couple of, kind of the more, objective or administrative things that DC is looking at, again, is, continued use of the, contractor submission portal. And I think one thing to note there is that, there is at least some consideration being given to also utilizing that for provisional billing rates or PBRs. Whether that would, help more contractors get, timely, look at those and perhaps have those established by audit, would be one potential, benefit there. It may also have some, kind of additional requirements that make that a, potentially a little bit more of a process. Quick update on the cost guidebook, is that, it was just adjusted to have, 26 sections on, 31, part 31 cost areas. And then in terms of, information for contractors, hopefully we'll see an update to that. It certainly is getting a little bit dated at this point. And so that may be an area where, we see some kind of new, new information that will be helpful for contractors moving forward. Just continuing on that, contractor information survey, again, that's something that's being used for, risk assessment, and again, we're seeing that being applied to, contractors of smaller size more, and so certainly, they being DCA, are actually pursuing, audits on some of the smaller contractors that, perhaps, haven't had any audit activity in many years. So certainly be aware of that. Couple things on the NDA that, I think are of interest, and we touched on, at least one of these, previously, is, the D021, is really where, Jacqueline mentioned previously, is that, could business system audits be another instance where, independent public accounting firms could be utilized, and that is a big topic, and I think that will be there'll be a lot of internal negotiation on that. DCA, being very involved in that. That's certainly something that's a big part of their audit purview. And so they would be, kind of unlikely to see that go as part of their workload. However, for contractors, that would give them certainly a lot more latitude to try and get audits completed, and get their systems established as, hopefully approved is what you're going for. The second NDA point to note is really about defining, what is, a material weakness in business systems. So that may bring some additional kind of clarity in terms of, where, what constitutes a particular, something that really is material and may impact, the ability of the government to rely on that data. And then again, we're kind of post-COVID and things are getting back to normal. So, we are seeing lots of floor checks, and, audit activity getting out to contractor facilities. Just following on, and we won't spend much time here. There has not been, a newer IG report. And so, really just kind of, putting these in for, as placeholders, is that, there's certainly a lot of, oversight and, visibility into some of the initiatives that, have been, somewhat imposed on DCAA. And so in terms of, quality standards that they're following, how are they justifying findings within the audit reports? So there's, certainly going to be continued look, and we expect that, it'll be fairly similar the next go around. keep on. Okay, and then again, just kind of closing this out is we would expect to see some additional information later this spring, to see if there's additional focus areas based on either IG or peer review of DCAA.
All right, Brendan, thanks a lot. DCAA has issued very few MRDs, which are memorandum for regional directors, over the past year, and even fewer of the MRDs that were issued have relationship to contractors. Go briefly, DCAA issued this audit report where, not audit report, but audit guidance, where auditors are to ask another question of contractor management in the entrance conference that the auditors conduct in regard to an audit. And the question that they are supposed to be asking of management is, were specialists used in the preparation of the subject matter of the audit? For what DCAA means by that is, for example, if the audit is of the contractor's pension plan, were pension experts used in developing the plan, the actuarial assumptions that were used in there, and the cost that would be generated in regard to the pension plan. So if the answer to the question is no, then the auditors are instructed to risk or elevate the risk that they perceive to be inherent in the particular type of subject matter because of the lack of use of subject matter experts in the contractor preparing its presentation for the particular subject matter of the audit. Of course, this raises the age-old question as to whether contractors are required to answer such questions, because if there is a good issue as to whether DCAA has the authority to require contractors to provide information that is not in their records, such as to respond to interrogatories such as this, and the old question about doing questions of floor checks, questioning contractor employees, that age-old question as to that where the DCAA has such authority. Okay. And another one of the MRDs just pointed out to auditors that Congress tinkered with TINA, with the law that requires contractors to submit certified cost or pricing data or data other than certified cost or pricing data. Congress eliminated Section 2036A and recodified the truthful cost or pricing data statute in Chapter 271 of Title 10. Didn't make any substantive changes to the statute and requirements for contractors, simply rearranged the U.S. Code to present the requirement in a different section. The FAR, the DFARs, and the PGI have all been updated to reflect this, I would say, administrative change in regard to TINA. No substantive changes.
Tinkered is a very good word for this MRD, and we're going to turn it over to Jacqueline to talk compensation cap, and then back to you, John, the court cases.
All right, so we have another MRD 23 PSP 001 that DCAA has issued, and we have upped the compensation cap to $619,000. So we kind of run through how to calculate the compensation cap on the next two slides. So if you want to go in and calculated. You've got your current fiscal year cap amount equaling prior fiscal year cap amount times the change in the employment cost index for all workers. And you can go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, table 4 for your compensation amounts. Next tab. And here we go through doing a comparison between 2020, 2021, and 2022. So we're seeing the increase each year. So we're at 619,000 for 2023.
So just remember to use the correct amount and double check it when you're going between different ICS audits and preparing ICSs, especially if you have to resubmit as well, because that does change on a yearly amount.
Yeah. All right, John, court cases.
All right, thank you. There are 3 of them that we have, and I will just go through these rather briefly because we're running out of time. The first one is Strategic Technology Institute. What happened here is that STI got its first cost reimbursement contract in 2007. It was a multi-year contract. So because it was the first cost reimbursement contract, this was the first contract on which STI was required to submit an incurred cost proposal. STI submitted their incurred cost proposals or prepared the incurred cost proposals on time using an outside consultant. However, STI appears to have dropped the ball because it seems that nobody in STI ever submitted the proposals to DCAA or DCMA. So they just sat. And it wasn't until around 2014 when DCAA was reviewing an incurred cost proposal for 2010, where DCAA saw references to 2008 and 2009 and questioned STI about that. And STI said, yeah, we had these proposals. DCAA asked for them and got the 2008, 2009 proposals in 2014. It went on that DCAA audited those 2008, 2009 proposals, issued an audit report questioning several costs, and the DCMA contracting officer issued a final decision on the DCMA or DCAA audit report in 2018. And STI appealed to the ASPCA and was arguing that the government claim for disallowed cost was barred by the statute of limitations, 6 years. STI was saying that that DCAA and DCMA should have known about the lack of incurred cost proposals for 2008 and 2009 in 2009 and 2010. And the board said, wait a minute, there's no evidence. DCAA and both DCMA presented evidence showing that they never received any of those, either of those ICPs. And STI then looked through the passage of time, we can't defend against these questioned costs. So what happened by default, the government was able to prevail in this case brought by STI because STI's failure to submit the incurred cost proposals to the government on time. And so the takeaway from this is make sure you get your proposals in and make sure the government has the proposals. Don't just anticipate that they're in, and that is significant for many reasons, because it tells you when the proposal has to be audited and how long you have to retain records. And that leads us into double shot. Double shot is a very small contractor out on the West Coast that we had a little bit of involvement with these issues before the board. DCAA had questioned several costs that Double Shot had incurred on cost reimbursement contracts. And the ACO had sent a letter to Double Shot saying, DCA questioned these costs. What's your statement? What's your story on these costs? Why I shouldn't sustain the audit report? And Double Shot contacted us, and we saw that there were a lot of issues with the DCA audit reports. One was whether they were timely under the statute of limitations, and there was another issue in there relating to cost question because of the lack of records. So that brought up the issue of what was the appropriate records retention period for Double Shot. Double Shot responded to the ACO, who issued a final decision, and Double Shot appealed to the board. There have been 3 board decisions so far in regard to Double Shot's problems. The first board decision, Double Shot was asserting that the government's claim was barred by the statute of limitations because DCAA knew about all of the issues with Double Shot based on a flash report dealing with Double Shot's timekeeping system in 2010. So, and the government did not issue a final decision on Double Shot's cost until 2020. So quite a bit of difference between 2010, the flash report, and the final decision in 2020, questioning labor costs that were the subject of the flash report that DCA issued 10 years earlier. The board said, no, we can't tell whether there was the statute of limitations applies or not. So you're going to have to develop the record further before we can make that determination. However, in regard to the records retention issue and the what had happened is DCAA questioned costs based on FAR 31201-2D, which says that contractors are required to keep records adequate to support all costs claimed. But what this did was bring up how long was Double Shot required to keep the records, and by application of the audit clause, which says you keep records for 3 years or any shorter period that's required by FAR 4.7. And so looking at FAR 4.7, the records retention period for the records that DCA said were missing had expired. So the Double Shot had no obligation to have the records that DCA said were missing. So in that regard, the board sustained Double Shot's appeal, which was close to 80% of the cost that the government was claiming. And finally, Raytheon, this was a government appeal from an ASPCA decision. We covered the ASPCA decision last year. So this is just an update on that ASPCA decision. What was involved in Raytheon were costs that the government had questioned regarding lobbying costs and mergers and acquisitions. The board had sustained Raytheon's appeal based on the accounting system that Raytheon had. Basically, what Raytheon was doing was saying that for lobbying, the contractor employees did not have to record lobbying time that occurred outside normal business hours. And this was despite the fact that employees routinely conducted lobbying activities outside of normal business hours. You know, the old famous Washington cocktail party. So then the other aspect of this was mergers and acquisitions. What Raytheon's policy was not to record any M&A activity, which would be organizational cost, until there was a decision made to go after a particular target, or a decision had been made to offer a segment of Raytheon for sale out on the market. So until those events occurred, Raytheon would treat all the costs as being allowable. The Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit said the board was wrong on both counts. That Raytheon was, that any cost that Raytheon incurred outside normal business hours for lobbying activity would be unallowable cost. And for the M&A, logically, there had to be some research or some activities relating to the M&A. For example, for an acquisition, Raytheon had to do some research in regard to the target before there was a decision made to go after the target. And for a divestment, Raytheon had to do some analysis in-house to make the determination as to whether it would divest itself of particular assets or segments, and to preparation of the materials to market that particular segment. So all of that activity, Raytheon was claiming as allowable cost, and the court was saying, no, that's not allowable cost. You have to disallow those costs. Now, the interesting thing about this was that under Raytheon's accounting system, they didn't record allowable cost. Now, how that happened, that was not discussed by either the board or the court. The only thing that was recorded by Raytheon was unallowable cost. So I think Raytheon had a major issue in regard to their timekeeping system. And so we have later on attached as an appendix discussion of these cases in greater detail. So I suggest that you just look at the slides that are attached to the appendix to get a further understanding of what was in these particular decisions.
Thank you, John. Got to do your total time reporting. That's for sure. So we are about up the end of this webinar, but we do have a couple poll questions that we would like you all to answer. So our first poll question is: do you have questions that you'd like us to follow up with you on? Please use the polling feature and answer, and then also submit your question. I'm going to give a few moments for anyone to think about that and provide their question. While you all are thinking about questions you might have that you want follow up on, I think that timekeeping is probably one of the biggest cultural hurdles that companies have to deal with when working with the government. And it's interesting that, John, that court case, we deal with a lot of smaller mid-sized companies. Timekeeping is always a big cultural hurdle, but also Raytheon, a very large organization, still that's a topic. So it's interesting just as, when you get reminded about the dynamics and how it impacts everyone. So
Right. Yeah. Double shot. The main issue was timekeeping.
Yep.
Time cards, the absence of time cards. Or one interesting point about that was that the government was talking about time cards were not signed. And the board said, where's the requirement for a time card to be signed?
It's pointing back to the FAR always.
Yep.
So poll question number 2. Are you going through any DCAA audits right now and need any help? So yes, no, maybe, please feel free to respond. We are happy to help and provide guidance, even if it's just to be a sounding board and have more of a brainstorming session. But please feel free to reach out. And so I'm going to give a moment for this question. And with that, we appreciate everyone tuning in today and joining us for the webinar on 2023 edition of DCAA Hot Buttons. Again, if any future guidance comes out, we will make sure to get it out to everyone as soon as possible. And thank you all for attending. Have a great day.